from our dependencies. All right, and now let's take a look at how we can install package globally and what would be some of the use cases. And first, let's start with command. Let's jog our memory. Command was npm install and then -g and the package name. And in Mac, they might ask you for permissions. So you'll have to start with sudo and then again, same spiel. npm install, blah, blah, blah. And first, I would want to showcase that I haven't installed NodeMon globally. And the easiest way for me to showcase that is by running NodeMon and app.js. So we'll try to install NodeMon package globally. Why? Well, because then I can use NodeMon in any of my projects. At the moment, I have it as a local package. And of course, I can spin it up by running npm start. But let's imagine a scenario where I have, I don't know, 20 Node applications and I'm constantly working on Node applications. So to make my life easier, I will install NodeMon globally, and then I won't get this error. Because at the moment you can see command not found, NodeMon. All right, so how do we do that? Well, we can install it in our terminal, or we can do it in the integrated terminal. It doesn't really matter. When it comes to global packages, you can install it from anywhere. So in my case, I'm just going to navigate back to my terminal just so you don't think that I'm cheating. And I'll zoom in and we'll simply run. And by the way, I need to start with sudo and then npm install and -g. And of course, we're looking for NodeMon. So now, of course, I'm prompted to enter my password. And once I enter my password, of course, I'm going to install NodeMon globally. And now in any of my projects, I can simply go with command of NodeMon and then whatever is the file name. Now, to show you some of the use cases, if you work with Gatsby, you know that they have the global Gatsby CLI tool. And that was one of the reasons why you installed something globally is because, well, you used one of the frameworks, for example, React or Gatsby in this case. And then, of course, in order to set up the Gatsby project or React project, you needed to install this globally. Now, things have changed, though, with arrival of NPX. And I'll talk about the NPX at the end of the video. But notice if you navigate to your React docs and if you look for create a React app, which again was something that you needed to install globally, now they suggest this NPX route, where essentially you go with NPX and then again, whatever is the command name, for example, for create React app, that would be create React app. For Strappy, the headless CMS, that would be create Strappy app. And hopefully you get the gist, where for every resource that of course would be different. And with that command, you don't have to install that tool globally. For example, again, in our case, we're installing NodeMon, but normally prior to NPX, you would install this create React app globally, and then you can spin up those React projects. Now I'm going to go back to my terminal. As you can see, I was successful. So what's going to happen if I go back to my project and if I run NodeMon and app.js, since I have installed that package globally, there it is. I spin up my app.js. And if you don't believe me, I can change it back to hello world and I have no issues. Hello world. And there it is. Now, of course, I have hello world in the console. So hopefully it is clear that yes, we can install packages globally. And yes, one of the biggest use cases was working with some type of front-end library. But with an arrival of NPX, things have shifted, where now those libraries suggest using the NPX route instead. As far as my personal preference, since I'm recording a lot of courses, and since some of the global packages usually introduce some kind of bugs to the students. Now, not for all the students, but there's always this one student who just has a lot of issues with the global package. Personally, I avoid them as much as possible. So I always either use the NPX or I just set it up as a local dependency. Again, it's not a rule. You can do whatever you would want, but I'm just telling you what is my preferred option. As far as what is NPX, it stands for execute, and official name is the package runner. It is a feature that was introduced in NPM 5.2. And again, the main idea is following, where you can run that CLI tool, for example, in this case, create React app, without installing these globally. So as long as you have NPM with a version of 5.2 or greater, instead of doing this whole spiel of setting up the CLI tool globally, you just go with npx and then whatever is the tool name. And of course, the last one is the folder name. As far as the Package-Lock.Json, why do we need it? Well, if we take a look at our dependencies, we can see that they have versions. And if you remember, some of the dependencies have dependencies on their own. And of course, we need to keep in mind that those dependencies have versions as well. And for example, the person who gets your project, you probably want them to have the same exact setup, because keep in mind, as these versions change, well, so does some of the functionality, correct? So for example, you set up to your whole project, you use some kind of dependency that uses some other package, and that version changes, not for example for the bootstrap, but for the jQuery. And then pretty much your project is obsolete, meaning it might get some bugs because the version of the jQuery changed. So that's why you have this Package-Lock.Json, and in there you have those specific versions for all the packages, not only for dependencies, but also for the packages that the dependency is using. Now, as far as this version, we have three values, and you can think of it as a contract between us, the people who are using the package, and the person who is creating. And the first number is a major change. So when this changes, that means that there are some breaking changes. Now, the second one is a minor one. So that means that it is backward compatible. So for example, if this changes to 18, I shouldn't expect any breaking changes. And the last one is just a patch for the bug fix. So that's also something to keep in mind when you decide to publish your own package, that of course, that's why you have here this version. Now, lastly, I would just want to mention that if you're interested in more info about the Package.Json, I would suggest this resource. So I simply went with Package.Json, then keep on scrolling, and you're looking for, I guess, this blog post, right? So the name is The Basics of Package.Json. And in here, you'll literally find everything explained to the smallest detail, whether that is a name, version, and the rest of the fields that you can find in a Package.Json. Beautiful. We now know how to utilize NPM, and for starters, as a result, for the remainder of the course, instead of frantically typing node app.js in a terminal, we'll simply spin up nodemon, and it will watch for the changes and restart the app for us. Now what? Before we move on to creating servers with Express.js, there are a few important node topics I would like to cover first. And those topics are following: event loop, async patterns in Node.js, events emitter, and streams in Node.js. While these topics are extremely important, please keep in mind that our goal is to only understand the general ideas behind these concepts. And I only introduce them so you have an overall understanding of how things work in Node.js before we build our first Node.js app. If you're not satisfied with my explanations or simply want to do more research by yourself, just type any of these terms in your favorite search engine, and I can guarantee you'll find plenty of useful resources within a matter of seconds, like blog posts, YouTube videos, and conference talks. With that said, it's my strong opinion that it might be easier to understand those concepts more deeply. So not just a general understanding, but understanding them more deeply once you have one or few working Node apps under your developer's belt. Let me also mention that in order not to waste your time with time-consuming setup, in few upcoming videos, I will run some pre-built code. Let me be very clear though. I'm only going to do that in a few videos, and for the remainder of the course, we will type out everything together. All right, and let's kick things off by discussing the event loop. Now, event loop in Node.js is one of those topics where I could spend the entire course discussing it, and it still wouldn't be enough. So let's try to avoid that and instead just understand the general concepts. While there are tons of useful event loop explanations out there, the one that I probably like the most is this one. The event loop is what allows Node.js to perform non-blocking I/O, so input and output operations, despite the fact that JavaScript is single-threaded, by offloading operations to the system kernel whenever possible. And as you can see, I'm reading straight from the Node docs. Now, don't beat yourself up if this sounds like a lot of gibberish. There's a reason why one can dedicate the entire course just for event loop. It is a pretty complex topic, but one word I do want you to remember is this offloading, and you'll see why in a second. Also, don't worry, I have prepared more examples as well as some slides to get my point across. But just in case you're not happy with my examples, or you just want to explore the Node event loop in greater detail, here are a few external resources I find particularly useful. When it comes to blog posts, just go to your favorite search engine and type Node.js event loop. And the one that I find really useful is this one. And the resource is Node.js and not .org, but it is .dev. And then follow the link. And here they cover event loop in great detail with a lot of cool examples and pictures and slides and all that good stuff. And when it comes to videos, I would suggest going to YouTube and then just type event loop. And the first video that's going to pop up is going to be the event loop bot in browser JavaScript. And I'll talk about it in a second. And the Node.js specific event loop video is this one. I believe it's 15-minute long, and you can see the name over here. So this is a very, very useful video where the speaker covers a lot of useful details about Node.js loop in great detail. And the reason why I'm suggesting the first one as well, what is the language that we use in Node? That, of course, is JavaScript, right? And even though there's some differences between the event loop, the one that we use in the browser, and the one that is in the Node.js, if you understand the concepts behind the event loop that we use in a browser, trust me, you're already halfway there to understanding how the Node.js event loop works. Since it's such an important topic, like promised, I have prepared some of my own resources as well. We'll start with the slides and move on to the code examples in the next video. As a side note, I made all the course slides available on courseapi.com. Again, that website name is course-api.com. And once you click on the slides link, you'll see all the slides. And I would want to start our discussion by taking a look at what it means that a JavaScript is synchronous and single-threaded. And effectively, it's just a fancy way of saying that JavaScript reads everything line by line. So for example, if I have console log with first task, then I have a for loop that takes some time, in this case 2 seconds, but that could be 10 seconds, that could be 20 or whatever. And then I have another console log of next task. JavaScript will just start reading everything, and it will read it line by line. And if this takes a long time, it will only run the next task once it's done performing this time-consuming one. So hopefully that is clear, that JavaScript just reads everything line by line. And now let's take a look at our second slide. And in here, we can see the solution if we would want to offload something to the browser. So when we're building browser JavaScript apps, we have this option of offloading to the browser. Now, of course, it doesn't mean that we can offload the for loop. That's not going to work. This effectively is still going to be the blocking code, but browser nicely provides the API where we can offload those tasks to the browser. And only when the task is done, then we execute the callback. And probably the example you have done the most is the fetch, essentially when we make the network request, but we can also do that, for example, with a set timeout. So I still have console log with first task, but then even though my set timeout function has the second argument of 0, so essentially I have set timeout function, I provide the callback function that's going to be executed in certain amount of time. Even if this is 0, meaning you would expect this one to run right away, it only runs after the next task. So once JavaScript is done executing the immediate code, only then it executes the callback. So in this case, we have the set timeout, the API that is provided from the browser, and we just say that we would want to execute that in 0 seconds. So effectively, there is no wait time. However, JavaScript will first execute this code and only then will execute the callback. So that way we can offload those time consuming operations to the browser. Again, it doesn't mean that we can offload for loops. It means that browser does provide some APIs where we don't have to write the blocking code. Now, let me be very clear though. When I say we cannot offload for loops, what I mean is that we can still write blocking code in JavaScript, but the browser does provide some nice APIs where we can offload those time consuming tasks. And that brings us to our main friend, the Node.js event loop. Again, before I go over the example, let me stress something. Event loop is somewhat complex, and this is just to give you a general understanding. So let's imagine this scenario. I have an app, and just like any cool app, I have subscribers or users or however you would want to call them. And in this case, since my app is so popular, I have 8 of them. And what do the users do? Well, they're probably being annoying and they're requesting something from the application. And as the requests are coming in, the event loop is responsible for avoiding this type of scenario. So let's imagine this. I have all these users, the requests are coming in, but Larry the Little decides that in his requests, there's going to be some kind of time consuming, I don't know, database crawl or something like that. So effectively, he's requesting something, and behind the scenes in my code, that means that I need to perform something that takes a long time. So in this case, the event loop just registers the callback. So it registers what needs to be done when the task is complete. Because if the event loop wouldn't do that, then we would have this scenario where the requests are coming in, and because Larry is requesting something that takes a long time, the rest of the users would have to wait. And essentially, it's not that the actual operation takes a long time. It's just the fact that we're wasting our time on waiting for that operation to be done, and only then we can serve the other users. But what the event loop does, it registers the callback, and only when the operation is complete, it executes it. Now, keep in mind that, again, we're not executing this right away when we can. Effectively, it's the same scenario where we run our immediate code first, and only then, when we have the time, we execute the callback. So, for example, in this scenario, if I would have 100 console logs after the next task, I would run them first, and only then the second task would appear here, regardless of what is the time set in here. Because again, we're running our immediate tasks first, and only then we run the callbacks. So the same thing happens here, where the requests are coming in. Let's say that the operation is complete. We first registered the callback, operation is complete, and instead of executing that callback right away, it effectively gets put at the end of the line. And then when there is no immediate code to run, then we execute the callback. Hopefully that is clear. Event loop is our best friend because with the help of event loop, we can offload some